It's about choosing between the starving and the hungry.
Conflict, climate, and COVID-19 are pushing more than 45 million people to the brink of starvation. Today, we're talking to the World Food Programme's leading expert on war and hunger and what we need to do before it's too late. We know that the world is facing a hunger crisis right now. The war in Ukraine, on top of the impacts of COVID-19 and climate change, we know it's causing extreme hunger hotspots to pop up around the world. Can you explain for us a little bit why this is happening? What's the reason for this global hunger crisis?
We don't suddenly become hungry from one day to the next. This has been a slow burn of multiple issues that have been creeping up on us. Climate change, which we tackle, we see the rise in temperatures, that is starting to erode the ability of farmers to actually produce their crops. In some cases, we can't even access land because we've had flooding. And this takes away livelihoods. This takes away the ability of countries to produce the crops that they produce and then they export to be able to support their own people. That's one. The other, of course, is the pandemic. And we know that we have seen a huge shift in the way that the world has been operating over the last 2 years, since the way that we've had to deal with the pandemic. But that's caused huge restrictions when it comes to travel, our ability to move assistance into countries, our ability to trade, to move commodities around the world. But also you see that countries themselves have to prioritize their people. And that means much less support going to fragile countries. I'm coming lastly to the one that I find the most disconcerting and the one that's seen the greatest impact, and that's conflict. Conflict beyond our hands in many instances, but that's the greatest driver of hunger today. It's the one that has the most impact. And if you bring it together with climate change and COVID, you have sort of unparalleled effects when it comes to hunger. It cuts off people from food. So that real access to food, supply lines, being able to reach your own crops and produce your own food, the accessibility diminishes completely. But what you're also starting to see is this pattern where food is actually targeted in terms of war tactics. So if you want to dominate a population, and this goes back in history, the best thing you can do is cut off your food supply to your population. But it lies at the heart of whether you can win or lose a war. And that's why you're starting to see these huge numbers and families, populations on the brink of starvation.
Ukraine and Russia together, I think, produce a significant proportion, for example, of the world's wheat. What impact has this most recent conflict had on this crisis that was already growing?
We didn't bargain for was the crisis in Ukraine. On top of what we say the 3 C's, is making it exponentially worse. They produce a huge amount of wheat, but they also produce a significant amount of fertilizer. And I don't think any of us actually anticipated that this would add to the ripple effect globally. But as a result, many of the countries where we have been moving wheat into and which purchase wheat or which purchase fertilizer, for the production of their food, rely on Ukraine and Russian imports. And that's having a knock-on effect on the prices. Michael, what we're seeing is that we've got to make really hard choices because there's simply not enough to go around.
I remember having a conversation around a terrible choice with our World Vision team who were distributing WFP food in Central African Republic. And this was in 2018, even before the current crisis has made it even worse. And I remember talking with our director there, his name is Musa, who said, we have a choice. We have enough, the amount of food we have available is half of what is required. So we can either give half a ration, which will only get partway through a month, to everyone, or we can give a full ration to half the people.
World Vision's our largest partner. You're in 33 countries with us. We rely on you. In many ways, you're our backbone in some of the deepest operations. What this means is that we have to choose between where to serve and where not to serve, which populations to reach and not to reach if our funding is limited, or if we just have the access. And this is really at the heart of it, because if it costs us more to purchase food, that means less people. If it costs us more to move food, that might mean not reaching everywhere we want to. So it's about those hard choices.
In 2011, for example, in Somalia, there was a famine declared. 260,000 people died, half of them children. Of course, many of those deaths took place even before the official famine was declared. How do we prevent the mistakes of the past? How do we do things differently and learn together? And what are some of those things that we do differently today that we know will help make a difference in fighting the crisis?
If you look today at the numbers for Somalia, the latest hotspot report, the Somalian numbers are really scary. So we're coming back to a situation that is not so different to the one that you mentioned, Michael. The question is why? The key to famine is that it's actually multifaceted. It's not just about food. I think sometimes we forget, or we think that it's just about food. But famine is really a combination of health, basic social services, social protection, access to natural resources. It's your whole piece of well-being that you need to function so that you don't become so vulnerable that you're at the point of famine. And so if you look at what I would say would be the root causes of famine, the problem statement, it's a combination that spans humanitarian development, economic, and political. I think the primary reason is conflict. Until you have that stability from a security perspective, populations are always going to be vulnerable. It doesn't mean you can't make progress, but your progress is not going to be sustainable and you're always going to be sliding back. So that's where I would say in very simple terms, we need to crack it. The cracking of the nut, so to speak, is going to have to be on the political side.
What's your suggestion on how we can engage Canadians, the public, policymakers, governments to care and take action now?
I've been a long admirer of World Vision's advocacy work. And I think this is where reaching out to our communities, especially in Canada, and really bringing a voice, a coherent and a strong voice to the conversation actually has a strong influence on governments. So now is the time actually to raise our voices, to speak out, to campaign, whether that's in schools or whether that's in local communities and health centres. I think it's really about bringing everybody together and leaning on our governments, leaning on world leaders to make the changes that are necessary for us to not be in the situations we're in. I think we also have to stop feeling that Somalia is far away. It's not far away. You know, we tend to be looking at photos and pictures and television from the comfort of our sofas, but actually with the Ukraine crisis and everything we've spoken about, it's coming closer and closer. And we have a responsibility to tackle things with a longer term view. You know, are these kids great? They've got food for the next 6 months. What happens after the next 6 months? What's the piece of work that allows their families to work? Where's the school that allows them to be educated? Is there food in the school? Where's the sustainability? So I would say, let's advocate, let's come together as communities. Our world is actually a lot smaller than we think it is, but let's have a longer term view when we do that.